With the flick of her pen, she writes.
Chapter 9. Love Rules. Billy sat idly looking out over the forest floor. He had come out later than expected, but he was hoping to find some turkey tail shrooms to go along with the amazing chaga he had found the morning before. The thing was, he couldn't keep his mind on mushrooms. He was feeling lightheaded and a little worn around the edges. This ghost girl thing was really beginning to get to him, and he still had no answers. He did, however, have a lunch date tomorrow with Chandra Rose, and that made him excited, yet unnerved at the same time. He would love to get to the bottom of the visions he'd been seeing. He hadn't told Chandra that this wasn't a one-time thing. He didn't let on that he'd been seeing her for quite some time now, going on decades actually, since he was just starting out in middle school. He had been in his bedroom playing video games and had fallen asleep, game controller in hand. He had awoken, at least he thought he was awake, to a vision of a girl with long dark hair standing in the corner of his room. Her eyes looked so familiar to him, but he couldn't place why or how. He had watched as she stood over him, and then smiling, a tear rolling down her face, she had disappeared. He hadn't told anyone about that time or the many other times he had dreamt of her. But now there was no sleeping in order to see her. She simply appeared unprovoked and uninvited, although he didn't want to ask her to leave. Ghost or no ghost, there was just something about her. She had his heart, and he didn't or couldn't understand why. So he had phoned Chandra with some idea of a lunch date and the notion of doing something with her to find out what this ghost wanted with him. He'd met Chandra when he was traveling in Southern California with his buddy Roz. Roz and he were just friends, at least that's what he thought. He just always felt more comfortable around women. They always knew where they stood with him, and they made the best friends. Although he couldn't deny that many friends had turned to lovers, but it was never the same after that. Roz had booked them in for the night at Soul Step, run by Sky Monroe. His sister Jade was a famous pop star, and Roz hoped she could get an autograph from Sky if she put herself out there. You know, butter the guy up a bit, maybe even get him into her bed that night. Roz had tried to lay down like that with Billy before, after they both had drunk a little too much vermouth, but he wasn't like that Billy. He was a nice guy and all that. So Roz had put her notions of having him in her arms aside, content to be his friend. It was actually Billy on their first night at Soul Step who had caught Sky's eyes. Those ghostly eyes had a way of drawing people in, and Sky had wondered who this guy really was. Sky knew a good guy when he saw one, although he was still trying to figure out if his sister's boyfriend was a good one. Sky had introduced Billy to Chandra at dinner that night at his private table, and in between rounds of whiskey and vegetarian delights, they had got to talking. Billy had let on to Chandra that he thought he was a haunted man, which piqued the psychic's curiosity. She could tell karma when she felt it, and she hadn't been so sure a ghost was involved. They had left it at that, and dinner had gone on, ending with a walk on the beach. Chandra knew that somehow she had known Billy before. He felt like a brother to her, and they had instantly clicked. Now she was in town, and they could hang out again like old times. He had planned a light dinner at his favorite restaurant, Collage, and then a walk on the beach with s'mores and cognac. He was just like that, thoughtful of every small detail, making others feel charmed and at ease. Except for that Lauren Brisbane at the club, he just couldn't shake the feeling that she was up to no good at times, and it made him leery. Why didn't he quit the club and look for another place to do hot yoga and punch out his worries and cares was beyond him yet. He sat up lost in his daydreaming and realized it had gone dark out. He had a way to walk back to the car, so he pulled out his flashlight and started off towards the park entrance. It was then that he thought he saw something coming from within one of the larger trees, one of the old sycamores. It seemed like a light was emanating from it. But how could that be, he thought. I've been out here too long, he laughed out loud, chiding himself for fearing anything. It just wasn't in his nature. But there was a light there. He moved closer to the tree. It was ethereal, and he wondered, even hoped he might see something magical. A fairy ring, perhaps, or some old tree gnome popping out to say hello. He unfocused his eyes a little, like they always say to do when you're faced with eyeing some magical being. And he continued to look, or as he continued to look, he saw something float up from behind the tree. A voice echoed up in the darkness. "Billy Tavish, we have a secret to tell you," the voice said in a lilting accent that seemed Irish, he thought, although that didn't sound very Irish. "Billy, she's coming, get ready," the lilting voice said in a happy tone. "Get ready." And then the light faded out, and he was left there in the dark, flashlight in hand. He didn't know how or why, but he was not going back to his car just yet. There was magic afoot, and he wanted to learn more. Chapter 10, The Lovers. It was time for his lunch date with Chandra, so Billy woke to the sound of birds chirping and sunlight dappled in the window over his bed. He had the best friends, he thought, always putting him up when he needed it. He had put off going back home to the Oregon coast until he could meet with Chandra and get a handle on his emotions surrounding these sightings he was having. He was calling them sightings now, unable to fathom anything else they might be. But knowing souls called them visitations, and not the dastardly kind. When an angel visits, you know. And Larimar was an angel in human form, at least in this lifetime. Billy couldn't quite recall how he had gotten into bed. He had gone to the neighborhood pub Makalele's after finishing his way back into town from his magical mushroom experience. After the light in the tree sighting, he had poked around in the forest, wondering where this magical light had emanated from. He had called in his guides to help him find out what was going on, but in his altered state of mind, he had trouble hearing them. It wasn't altered from drugs or alcohol. No, this kind of mind-altering came upon someone when they had stumbled into the land of fairy. Not all fairies had a human's best interests in mind, but luckily Billy had come across an ancient tree growth area where the most benevolent of fairy clans on the west coast made their home. As he had gone into meditation at the stump of one of the oldest trees, he felt a light touch on his arm. Eyes opened to no one there, so he just kept going. Deep in Soul Journey, he saw a light. It almost looked like a lighthouse. He knew that the fairies in this space were guarding him, helping him to try to see more of her, the vision, yet he wasn't prepared for the voice or what he was going to see next. He saw an older girl, this time maybe in her 20s, he thought. She was in the arms of a man with blonde shoulder-length hair, and she was crying. She turned away from the blonde stranger and looked directly into Billy's heart. And then he felt it, like a beam of light emanating from her soul. Could ghosts have a soul, he wondered out loud? But the light touch on his arm told him to keep going. The vision became brighter, and the light from her soul became stronger, and then he heard it plain and clear as a cloudless day. "Billy, I love you. Come to me, please come to me," she cried. He was so confused. She was in the arms of another man. He had never seen her that way before. But now he saw with greater clarity a scene playing out in his mind, bolstered on by the helping fae around him. She reached out a hand to him, pulling him etherically closer. Her intentions were so strong to see him, feel him, touch him, that he was literally being drawn in. But drawn into where? And he could sense and feel that this was the love he had been searching for, the love he could never feel at the feet of another woman. This was her. This was she, the woman he had been seeing all along, but older, stronger, and more powerful now in her desire to be with him. But how? He couldn't know that yet. It wasn't to be told in dreams. The vision faded, and he had sat in the forest for what seemed like hours, focused on the vision of her face and the hand reaching out to him through time and space. This was his love. He knew it heart and soul, and he was bound by a soul contract he couldn't know about yet to find her. All he knew was that he had to find her, and that was that. A new passion and strength crept into his psyche as he wandered back to his car and ended up crawling into bed, wondering how and why he could make this dream a reality.